On today's episode of Scratch, we're going to be looking at chicken pot pie made the old-fashioned way from scratch.
We love to make traditional food with our kids. We think that eating the old-fashioned way and sitting around the kitchen table is kind of where our family needs to be after a crazy, hectic, busy day. So we're gonna make a really basic pie crust to start this recipe. First, we start with 1/3 cup and a tablespoon of shortening. You can just do vegetable shortening. If you had lard or other types of more dense fats like that, you could use that. We have a cup of flour, just a sprinkle of salt. And what I like to do is I like to mix my flour and shortening with a spoon before I bring in a pastry knife and the fork, pastry fork. This is a pastry knife, pastry cutter. And with the pastry cutter, the reason I do that is if you just get right into the shortening, it gums up the pastry cutter. So if you kind of get your flour over it a little bit, it really, really helps. And you're just going to keep mixing this until your shortening becomes kind of the size of a pea, if that makes sense.
Just remember, we're not professional chefs. The whole purpose of this show is to show you how you can make delicious meals in your home for less money than you would spend going to the grocery store and buying something pre-prepared.
And honestly, prepared stuff doesn't always taste that great.
And this really, it takes a little bit more time, but yeah, it tastes good, and we always make enough that we can freeze it or have it for leftovers, and we like it and our kids like it, and it's budget friendly too. So
it is. So right now I'm just going to show you that we've kind of mixed up our shortening and our flour together. And then what you're going to do is add cold water to it. And it's important that your water is cold. You're going to just add a few tablespoons at a time of cold water. The cold water really helps your crust stay flaky. So, I don't know, 3 or 4, and then just get your spoon in there and start mixing. This is quite a wet dough. You want it to be wet so that it stays together when you roll it out for your pastry. Add in a few more tablespoons. And we're getting there. Every time I make it, it's a different amount of water. I'm not sure why that is, but it just is that way. Do you have any ideas why that is?
A lot of it sometimes depends on how cold your shortening is. It's actually better to use cold shortening. Mm-hmm. Anytime you're making a pastry or a dough that you're using a dense fat with, you want to use it cold because it helps it stay together better. And then she's actually going to put this in the refrigerator for a little bit, and that'll help make it flakier and make it kind of pop more.
It will, and I like to get right in there. When you think of traditional cooking, I think about getting messy and dirty, and I love when my kids just get right in there and we have flour fights and sugar fights. And getting the kids' hands right in here in the dough, that reminds me of growing up with my mom and my grandmas and making real food.
We should get you a flowered apron. That would be awesome. Like a 70s apron.
I think I have one of my mom's old aprons at home. And it's red with flowers. Okay, so you can see we have a nice dough here. It's a little bit dry. I think I'm still gonna add a little bit more water to it and just mix it with my hands.
You want to be careful you don't over mix it. You want everything nice and incorporated, but if you over mix it, your pastry is going to end up tough.
It is, and that's no fun because pastry should be light and fluffy and flaky and airy. That's really, so you can see that the dough is sticking together as a ball. When you separate your dough, you're going to separate it into 2 pieces. You're going to make one piece a little bit bigger than the other, and then when you roll it out, it will automatically be the right size for the bottom of your pan. And I like to flatten these out in kind of a rectangular or a square shape, so when you go to roll them out, then they're already in the right shape. And that's a basic dough. We've now put the dough in plastic wrap, and it's gonna sit in the fridge for about half an hour to set up. After the break, we're gonna show you how to make the filling.
Welcome back. We're ready to start making the inside of our chicken pot pie. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with some carrots. and some broccoli. We're going to cut these up, and Devyn's actually going to take them over and get them cooking for us. So I like to cut the ends off of my carrots because I don't like the nasty ends. And I always have a scrap bowl on the counter when I'm cooking. Just kind of saves me trips from having to run back and forth to and from the, oops, you got to actually get it in there. So to and forth from the garbage. And this cutting board is actually one that I made with my dad. My dad's always been into woodworking, and so this has been something that's been in our house for a number of years. And so it's kind of something that's special to me. So I just like to cut my carrots in half, otherwise you end up with big chunks in there.
And nobody wants a big chunk of carrot.
Nobody wants a big chunk of carrot. So I'm not a professional chef, so my knife skills aren't all that great, but you know, just chop them up, make sure you keep your fingers out of the way. You don't want to end up with fingers in your soup, or in your chicken pot pie rather. We're going to set those off to the side as soon as we get these cut up.
And another way you can do the vegetables for this is you can just buy frozen vegetables. You don't have to use fresh carrots and broccoli. That's our favorite combination, but you can just buy the pea, carrot, corn mixture that you can buy at any grocery store. It's really inexpensive, and it's a great way to get your veggies in there. I much prefer fresh vegetables when I can get them. You can add any vegetables you happen to have in your fridge or your freezer.
Generally, I think the crunchier the vegetable, the better, because it just seems to cook up better. So if you like water chestnuts, you could put mushrooms in if you want.
Not in our house.
Not in our house. You'll never see mushrooms on this show. But anything like that you want. So there's our carrots. Devyn's going to take those over.
And I'm going to start with the carrots because they take a little longer to cook than the broccoli, so I'm going to give them a little head start.
And it's up to you how crispy you want your vegetables. You can leave them in the water for quite a while. You can just sort of blanch them. No, is that the right word? Blanch? Yep. And just barely, just kind of get them. Some people like crispy vegetables. Some people don't like them quite as crispy. So again, it's all about what you want and your own preferences. This show is just designed to give you some ideas of things that you can do at home that are simple, relatively quick, inexpensive, all that kind of stuff.
And the smaller you cut your vegetables, if you have picky eaters at home, kids or husbands, then this is a great way to hide some vegetables in there. You could beef up the chicken, beef up the chicken. You could add more chicken and hide those vegetables a little bit more, or really dice the vegetables quite small and hide them from those people that don't like them.
I never liked onions growing up, and this recipe does call for onions. My kids have seemed to follow in my footsteps, and so when I cut the onion in a little bit, you'll see that I try and get it pretty small. There, so if you go do that.
I'm gonna just cook the broccoli off with the carrots in the same pot.
And all this stuff has been washed. It's a good idea to wash your vegetables. You never know what they've got on them. We don't typically use organic and all that stuff just because that's not what we do. So I've got an onion here, and what we're gonna do is I've kind of scored it across the top, but we've obviously used it for something else as well. But onions always make me cry. And so I like to start cutting it on the top, because I find if I cut the bottom end, the root off, that's when I really start to cry. So
I think that's in your head.
That's probably in my head. So I just kind of score it on the top. It's easier to dice this way. And again, keep your fingers out of the way.
So one day I was at work and I came home. I am going to tell this story. Oh. I came home from work one day and Brian was home preparing meals for something. I don't remember what exactly. I came home and walked into the kitchen, and Brian, I kid you not, had his scuba mask on and was cutting onions so he wouldn't cry.
I always tear up. It's just, I don't know why.
Because you love this.
Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. Yeah, and I try and get these small. Onions are one of those weird things. If you want big pieces of onions, leave them big. If you don't want them, leave them small. It's tough when you try and cut them small and then you end up with a big piece. It just doesn't cook as well, doesn't cook as evenly. And
another option is to grate your onion into whatever you're doing. I find that really brings the juice out and I cry more. So I don't like to do that, but it is always an option. Okay, so get on that.
So you're going to go over there and do...
Start making the roux in a minute, but I'm going to let you do the chicken.
So we always buy rotisserie chickens. We love rotisserie chickens. The flavor on them is always really good. I guess it's a cheaper alternative to buying an entire pre-prepared meal. You could use chicken breast, boneless, skinless. You could use thighs or drumsticks or whatever you have. We don't use the skin for this recipe. The reason is, and the reason we buy rotisserie chickens, because of their great flavor, we actually use our own chicken stock, and we have a recipe for an amazing chicken noodle soup that we'll feature another time. that uses homemade chicken stock.
And chicken stock is super easy to make. There's no need to buy chicken stock. Homemade chicken stock is great because you know what's in it. And I actually am allergic to MSG, and so that's where I learned to cook a lot of stuff from scratch. Making your own chicken stock is so easy. Literally, we just pop all the bones, everything. When we're done pulling all the meat off, everything that's in here goes in.
All that lovely jelly. That's some good flavor.
There's great flavor in there. So we do that, we throw it in a pot with some water, celery, carrots, onions, and I just let it go low and slow all day. Some salt and pepper, garlic, kind of whatever's fresh on hand in our house, and it just goes slow and slow all day long.
Do you want more chicken than that?
Oh no,
is that
that's
good?
lots.
Okay,
That's good.
so that's good for chicken. So we're all set with the inside prep. Devyn's gonna take you over to the stove and she's gonna show you how it all comes together.
So we're gonna start with a basic roux, and all a roux is really a basic white sauce. And so we start with our butter and just make sure your heat's not too high. You don't wanna brown your butter, you just wanna melt it. And so a roux just consists of butter, which I like to melt, and then you can add in your flour. And your onion to get your onion cooking. So really basic here. You're just gonna get that cooking. Really, you're just softening your onions and cooking off your butter and your flour together. It doesn't take too terribly long. You'll see everything is starting to combine here. I'm just coating the onions, really. Nice and cooked. You just want to get all those little bits. When things start to cook to the bottom of the pan, don't be too afraid of little brown pieces and things. Those really are what adds the flavor to your roux. So, and what the roux does is it actually is the thickening agent for our sauce. Next, I'm going to add our cream. Just 2/3 of a cup of heavy cream. Now that being said, you can always do milk instead of cream if you don't have cream or you don't want to use such a heavy ingredient. We like to use cream. We like things a little bit richer tasting. The cream we find also thickens it up just a little bit more. And you just want to keep stirring this, and it's going to thicken as it cooks. You're just going to add a little bit of salt and pepper, a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, a little bit more. And just let this kind of cook off. And you want to keep stirring. When you have dairy products on the stove, they tend to burn, and we don't want burning. We just want a nice cooked product here. And actually, I think we're going to take a little break here, and I'm going to come back and add just a little bit more milk to this to loosen it up a bit. So we'll see you after the break. Welcome back. I'm just adding some chicken stock to loosen this up. We did not make this chicken stock from scratch, but it is one that we purchased from a local store. We don't always buy organic food like Brian mentioned earlier, but chicken broth is one thing I tend to buy an organic version of. So we're just gonna stir this and let it thicken up, and you'll see the chicken stock will start to thicken, and it'll turn a nice creamy yellow color once everything is combined well. So we're gonna let that just cook a bit. And I'm gonna add our cooked veggies, which we've already strained the water off of, and our cooked chicken. Okay, I'm just gonna add our veggies quick. Again, you could use frozen veggies or whatever you have in your fridge. I love fresh broccoli and carrots cooked. We're gonna just add our chicken in. You could do this with any other meat as well. At Thanksgiving time, we have our leftover turkey. We often do turkey pot pie. So we're just gonna combine this and let it thicken and cook. And I'm probably just gonna add a little bit more salt and pepper. And a little more pepper. Don't be afraid to season things. Seasoning is good. People like to taste the seasoning, and salt always brings out the flavors of everything else in your dish. Welcome back. We're at the very final step of our chicken pot pie. We've now taken our pie crust out of the fridge, and I'm placing it on a floured counter. I like to just roll my rolling pin through the flour before I start rolling this so we don't stick. Nobody wants to stick to it.
And remember, your dough is a little bit moist to start with, so that's why you need it a little bit moist when you start, is so that that extra flour doesn't make it tough.
One thing I love about homemade traditional food is that nothing ever looks perfect, and I'm okay with that.
But it sure tastes good.
It does taste good. So one way that you can do this is you can just roll this up onto your rolling pin.
Genius.
And then place it into your, you didn't know that move?
I didn't.
And then you can place it into your pan. And then just put it in as you need to.
All right. If you like a little bit thicker of a crust, you can roll it a little bit thicker.
It'll just need to cook a little bit longer. You just need to be aware of that. So Brian's gonna make a really rustic looking crust there while
I'm just getting all the edges off.
I know, while I make our top. And if you wanted to get fancy, you totally could and use a cookie cutter to measure out shapes. I am not quite that fancy.
We're usually too hungry to worry about that.
We are very hungry people. And we don't like people to get hangry in our house, so we like to feed them because they're little people. We like to feed them so they don't get grumpy. Or big people over here that might get grumpy. Okay, so Brian's
So now that that's in there, we're gonna, if you want to scoop, I'll hold this.
Yeah, this is a really heavy pan. We love this pan.
It's got a nice thick bottom. And who doesn't love a nice thick bottom?
It was going to happen.
Yeah.
All right.
No, but it heats more evenly. It takes a while longer to heat, so you do have to be careful.
All right.
Anyways.
Oh, that looks so good. Okay, and we can try our little rolling pin move here, or I can just pick it up too.
Just pick it up. And
Oh, ta-da. It's not gonna be perfect, and that's okay. All right, look how cute that is. It's all perfect and cute. It's perfectly rustic. That's what it is.
one thing you want to remember is poke a couple holes in the top.
It's called scoring.
It's called scoring. There's a joke there
Why
somewhere.
are we doing that?
Well, then stuff bubbles up through it and it prevents the top from...
Yeah, and it stops your crust from getting a one giant bubble in it. Okay, so Brian's just gonna stick this in an oven at 425 for 30 to 35 minutes. If you like your crust a little brown, more brown than we do, you might want it a little longer.
So after 35 minutes, our pie is done, as you can see. It looks so good. We're gonna just cut into it here.
Look how perfect that crust turned out. It's all flaky.
We've got these really cool rustic wood serving. They look really cool. And we're gonna just throw it on a plate there so you can see how awesome that is.
Oh, yum.
And look at how great that looks. We're gonna set those there. So, I grew up not really liking chicken pot pie, but fortunately for me, I married somebody that found a good recipe and knows how to make it. And it's so good.
To make your very own chicken pot pie, you want to start with a basic crust. 1 cup flour, half a teaspoon of salt, 1/3 cup and 1 tablespoon of shortening, and 4 to 5 tablespoons of cold water. For the filling, you'll use 2 cups of cooked carrots and broccoli or whatever vegetables you have on hand, 1/3 a cup of butter or margarine, 1/3 a cup of flour, 1/3 a cup of diced onion, salt and pepper to taste, 1 3/4 cup of chicken broth, 2/3 of a cup of cream or milk, and 2 to 3 cups of cooked chicken. Bake at 425 degrees for 35 minutes. Talking with food in your mouth.
That's how I roll. Anyways, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We hope you'll join us again for another episode of Scratched.
Bye.
Scratch.
Scratch.
Scratch. It's scratch. It's not scratched.